momento de recibir a nuestro eje central de la noche de hoy. Es el momento de hablar sobre nuestra primera conferencia magistral enmarcada en el Foro Hispaniola de Sostenibilidad. Y se trata de Kim Holmes, gerente y ambientalista, directora de Reciclaje y de Diversificación en la Asociación del Comercio de la Industria del Plástico en Estados Unidos, The Plastics Industry Trade Association, SPI. Propietaria y consultora principal de Foro Sostenibility INC. Gerente de mercadeo avanzado para Recycle Portfolio Development y SABIC Innovative. Directora ejecutiva del Resource Recycling, Plastics Recycling Update y eScrutiny. Un fuerte aplauso para nuestra conferencia de hoy a cargo de Kim Holmes.
When I was asked to give the talk, we talked about what all we would be covering today, and when I was thinking about what we would entitle the presentation, I thought about what are the key things that I would really want to convey to a group that might be new to plastics recycling and really transforming how we view plastics and managing them as a resource. And, all I could come up with, I'm very much about kind of basic, succinct messaging. And so I came up with plastics recycling, good for the environment and good for business. And those are two key factors that you have to have in place for design of a sustainable system, right? So let's begin with the definition of sustainability. I know it's a very vague term. Sometimes people have different interpretations of what sustainability is. But I, again, try to keep it simple. I go with the very basic definition of sustainability following the 3 Ps, people, planet, profit. I'm sure that perhaps translates into something else in Spanish, perhaps not the 3 Ps. But in English, that's how we refer to it. So really keeping in mind that when you are making decisions about any sort of sustainable system, is it good for the people? Is it good for the planet? And can it be sustained from a business perspective? Because without those 3 key elements, you have to ask yourself, is it really sustainable? So I wanted to start kind of with that definition before we dove into the topic. So we all kind of understand within the context of this talk, what are we talking about in terms of good for the environment and good for business? And we'll explore that further. So what will we talk about tonight? Well, I want to offer you an introduction to SPI, and then we'll go over a little bit of plastics, about plastics, what the recovery potential is with plastics, the environmental benefit of plastics and plastics recycling, as promised in the title, a review of PET recycling, because I think that's a very good place to begin to build a collection infrastructure for materials. There's a very robust recycling industry around it, and it's a valuable material. And then we'll talk about kind of what the opportunity is here in the Dominican Republic. Okay, so a little bit about SPI. I don't know if any of you have heard of our trade association before. Before I got involved in plastics, I hadn't heard of them. So if it's new to you, it's expected. So we are a US-based trade association, and we're a little bit unique in that we really represent, our members come from the full supply chain of the plastics industry. So all the way from the plastic resin manufacturer through to the what we call the processor or converter, the person who's taking that plastic pellet and molding it into a product, the equipment manufacturers that support both of those groups, then the brand owners. We just added the brand owners, so the people who are actually putting their name on the products and putting it into the hands of the consumer. So with the addition of the brand owners, we really represent the full supply chain. And recyclers are a part of that too. Recyclers kind of fall into the material category because they are producing material for remanufacturing and processing. And so as, recycling is something that we have been working very hard at in the United States since about the 1980s, mid-1980s. And we'll talk about where we are at with recovery rates, but we've seemed to come up against a plateau in collection, and there's lots of smart people trying to come up with solutions of how we break past that plateau. And this group said, maybe we need to come at the recycling issue from a supply chain approach. Everyone at the table, everyone who's involved in the product design, distribution, material selection process, maybe if we all come together, we can figure this out. So the trade association formed the recycling committee about a year and a half ago. And that's when I came on board, and that's what I've been doing with our members. So SPI's vision, we want to advance a pro-manufacturing agenda in the United States. We are the third largest manufacturing sector in the US. We employ, the plastics industry employs just under 1 million people in the US. And we have a presence in, I think, almost every single state in America. So we are a very large piece of the manufacturing picture in the United States. We want to strengthen the global competitiveness for our members. While we are a US-based trade association, many of our members have a global presence. And then obviously we know manufacturing is a global industry and trade and the like. We want to help improve the productivity of the industry through technology advancements, communication throughout the supply chain. And then we adopted this last piece in 2012, at the end of 2012, pursuing zero waste. We want the plastics industry to be a green industry, and we believe it can be because plastics is a very valuable resource. Nothing should be wasted in the production process or after consumption. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is build the framework for both our members within their gates and for the consumers who are interacting with our products to make sure that all of that valuable material is recaptured. Okay, and so we're kind of aligned and do work in 3 strategic areas. So one is advocacy. We work very closely with state, local, and federal lawmakers. Education, that's one of the big things I do. I was telling Jesus, I probably do about 20 talks a year or so, because we want to be out there educating and engaging the community and decision makers around our products. And then connecting. We have a very large trade show that happens every 3 years. Actually, it will be coming up in March of 2015. Recycling is going to be a big theme, and it will be in Orlando, Florida. If anyone cares to join and engage with the plastics industry, I would encourage you guys to come. But we want to build the connections within the industry as well. So these are kind of our 3 core areas of operation. So let's get into the material. So plastics. Plastics are a really dynamic material. They've really changed modern society in many, many ways. So, they're responsible for the convenient and safe delivery of food shipped all over the world. Plastics play a huge part in safety. I always love the helmet example. As a mother of 2 small children, they always have their helmets. But if you think about vehicle safety and other areas of our lives, plastics play a really critical part in keeping us safe. And then plastics have really helped advance technology. Downsizing of technology, it's really been made possible through plastics. And then I think, very importantly, delivery of safe healthcare, safe and modern healthcare. You cannot get away from plastics in the healthcare environment. So really, plastics has improved our lives in many, many ways. But unfortunately, these are not always what we think of when we think plastics. I think a lot of people immediately, what comes into your mind is packaging, because that's what we interact with on such a basic level in our lives. And so unfortunately, the perception of plastics is not the helmet that keeps your child safe or that single-use shot that you got at the doctor that keeps you safe. It's the pollution problem, the negative images of plastics that really stay with us. And I think I've heard for every negative thing you hear, you have to hear 3 positive things to overcome that. And I think it's the same way visually in how we interact with things. If you have a negative interaction with plastics, you're going to have a negative opinion. And I always like to say that the 2 best attributes of plastics are they're lightweight and they're durable. The 2 worst attributes of plastics are they're lightweight and they're durable. And when they end up in the wrong place, which is the environment, it's a problem. And so we really need to begin to reverse consumer behavior. We need to reverse the perception of plastics that it is something disposable and not valuable, and it doesn't matter where it ends up. And so really, we're taking it on. It's our job to reach out to decision makers and communities to help shift that perception of plastics. Because in reality, plastics, when they're at their end of life, they can be a very valuable feedstock for chemicals, production of new plastics, new products, new fuels. It's a valuable, saleable, tradable commodity. Scrap material in general, not just plastics. Scrap material are the #1 export from the US every year. I don't know if you knew that. Largely to China, at least in the case of plastics. And then plastics are also a very valuable part of the remanufacturing feedstock. And so if we go back to kind of the size of the plastics industry, the 3rd largest manufacturing industry, we're always looking for more feedstock for production. And so this is the reality of scrap plastics, again, highlighting these are very valuable materials that need to be channeled into the proper places. So we'll just go over a couple other benefits of plastics. You know, you have kind of the negative environmental aspects if they are not channeled into the proper end-of-life management systems. And so I think that overshadows some of the other sustainability benefits of plastics. And so I just wanted to outline a few of those for you here. So lower resource and energy intensity. I don't know if the plastic bag discussion has come to the Dominican Republic. What's better, paper versus plastic? It's certainly raging up in the United States. My hometown, Portland, Oregon, has banned plastic bags. And even the Department of Environmental Quality for our state has stepped in and said, you know, if you're actually doing a life cycle analysis if you compare the environmental impact of paper versus the environmental impact of plastic, you really have much more environmental impact with paper because it takes more water and more energy to produce. Again, it goes back to the end-of-life issue. If you see a plastic bag in a tree, you're going to think, gosh, plastic is so much worse than paper because paper doesn't float and it will eventually go away. So, you know, really from a manufacturing perspective, plastic often has a much lighter footprint than alternative materials. And metals, especially metals, there's a lot of energy that goes into producing metals. Glass is a very heavy material. It takes energy to transport. So from a life cycle analysis perspective, plastics are a very beneficial material. They promote energy efficiency. Like I said, in terms of packaging, glass is very heavy. You can ship just as much product in plastic and use less energy to get it there than glass. Same with airplanes. I had the luxury of visiting the Boeing manufacturing facility, which is very exciting. If you're ever in Everett, Washington, up in the United States, definitely go. So they are making their new Boeing 787 planes out of a plastic composite fiber body and replacing the aluminum. And they're getting a 21% fuel efficiency out of it. And I think that's a fantastic example of some of the sustainability benefits through a product's lifespan that plastic can afford. And especially when you're talking about emissions at that level, they're much, much more impactful. They offer production of embodied energy of products. There's been a big trend in food packaging in the United States to ship like lettuce and fresh vegetables in what we call PET thermoform packaging. So that's you know, not your bottles, but it's been turned into a sheet and then shaped into a box or, you know, a berry package, a clamshell. And this type of packaging actually can extend the shelf life of food up to 20%. And when you start thinking about the embodied energy of food, how much water and energy it takes and chemicals to grow food, there's significant, again, life cycle savings and advantages to using these types of rigid plastics in packaging. And then improved quality of life. As I mentioned, plastics have afforded us many leaps in science, technology, and healthcare. So what's the recovery reality? What's the use of plastics? Where are plastics used? How much are used on an annual basis? And where do we stand with recovery? So I think, okay, so we'll talk about where plastics is used. So a lot of it, 14 million tons, the EPA estimated, I believe it was in 2012, went into packaging products in the US. And these are items that were manufactured in the US but could be consumed globally. So some of these products certainly ending up here. 11 million tons was used in durable goods. So those are your items like appliances, automobiles. And then 7 million tons was used in non-durable goods. So these are goods that are meant to, I believe 2 years is the cutoff. So if it can be consumed and disposed of in 2 years, it falls into that category. So you'll see there's, you know, it's not an even distribution between the three product categories, but packaging certainly is a little bit heavier use of plastics. But when you factor all of the plastics that go into production, and what is actually captured out. And this is, I think, the shocking part. The EPA, the US EPA, calculates that we are at a 9% recovery rate. And some people call that discouraging, and I see it as opportunity. We have a lot of opportunity to recover a lot of material. So where specifically is some of this recovery happening? Certainly PET and HDPE are the leaders. So when I had initial discussions with Jesus about this program and what strategy or angle might be the best entrance into plastics recycling, I think PET and HDPE make the most sense. PET probably even more so because of the rate of single-serving beverages that are being consumed. So then polypropylene, polypropylene is a number 5, and some of those are your shampoo containers. If you have butter containers, yogurt containers, those are your number 5s. There's big demand for that material, so that demand is beginning to fuel collection and processing in the United States. We're having a trend similar that's driving the polypropylene bottles, any non-bottle rigids, so some of those PET thermoforms as well. We came in at about 934 million pounds in 2011, and it takes time to aggregate this data, so you'll notice that PET number just came out for 2013 last week, so we're waiting on the HDPE and the polypropylene rigid numbers. And the film is another one, these grocery bags. So they're being deselected as a material, plastic, in shopping bag carriers, but we have a really robust collection infrastructure for them. And so that's one of the kind of tricky things in the discussion about plastic versus paper. We have a pretty robust collection infrastructure. Again, it comes down to educating consumers and prompting behavior change. Plastics from automobiles, recently not even available for recovery in the US until this past year. The EPA changed the handling rules. There was some concern about potential PCB contamination. And then appliances from plastics, they had the same end-of-life treatment method, go to a big auto shredder, metals are extracted, and plastic goes to the landfill. Hopefully we will see some big gains. We are working with the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, which represents auto recyclers and appliance recyclers, and hopefully we can change the situation for plastics there. But so really that 9% that you see is coming largely from PET and HDPE recovery. So what are the benefits of plastics recycling? So as I said, there are certainly environmental benefits, right? So you have energy and greenhouse gas savings, and there's a lot of information out there about kind of how you measure that benefit, but NAPCOR is the PET trade association, so they represent both prime, so what we call like virgin or prime PET manufacturers, that plastic that's getting made straight from the natural gas, all the way through recyclers. So they've done some calculations, and pound for pound, producing recycled PET flake only takes 16% as much energy and emits 29% as much greenhouse gases as going all the way back to the chemical constituents to make brand new PET. So if greenhouse gas savings is a priority, recycling is one way to really deliver on that goal. So fossil fuel avoidance. When a ton of plastic bottles are recycled, approximately 3.8 barrels of petroleum are saved. And that's from benefits of recycling there. So again, you are avoiding consumption of these non-renewable resources. Maximizing landfill space. Plastics, again, they're lightweight, right? So, and often bulky. They are built to hold a form. And so when you dump them into the landfill, you are taking up a lot of space that doesn't necessarily need to be taken up. We were just talking about expanded polystyrene recovery. There are some schools that are putting in densifiers and recycling their expanded polystyrene and getting huge financial savings because they're not filling up those roll-off containers with air. So so as communities are looking at ways to extend the life of their landfill, I don't know what the landfill situation is for the communities around here, but in the US, many of them only have 10 years left on them. And as they go back and try to site new landfills, people don't want new landfills. People want better management of waste, because waste is really not waste. It's untapped resources. So that's what we need to be working on, is shifting that mentality and shifting our solid waste management infrastructure. And then a big one that we are beginning to work more and more, and we're engaging at all levels, from the UN on their marine debris initiatives to NOAA. NOAA is our National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency in the US EPA, all the way down to communities that do small beach cleanups. We are very engaged on the marine debris issue, recognizing that it is not acceptable for these products to be ending up in the environment. What do we do to stop them? Recycling is certainly one option to do that, but we need to look at what we do once that stuff is already there. One program that we have actually is called Operation Clean Sweep, where we're encouraging our members to make sure that there's no pellet loss from their factory into the environment. And an NGO that had been measuring pellet contamination in the water has about 20 years of data, and there's actually been about a 20% reduction in the presence of pellets in the ocean, and the only thing they can correlate it back to is Operation Clean Sweep. So that's one area that we're pretty proud of. Okay, so the business case. Why would someone choose to use recycled content in a product? I think there is this misperception that recycled plastics are maybe an inferior material, they're really good for curb stops and park benches, but that's really not the reality. And one of the things we're putting together for this trade show in March is a recycled product showcase that highlights all of the innovative applications for recycled plastics. So they're going back into electronics, they're going into high-end fashionable products, they're going into automotive parts. So there are many, many reasons why people choose to use recycled plastics, and making the choice to use recycled plastics doesn't mean you're choosing an inferior material at all. So some of the reasons: reduced carbon footprint of your product. So we were talking about the energy savings, the water savings, the greenhouse gas savings. Many of these companies have made some commitments, some environmental commitments to reduce the footprint of their products. And using recycled content is certainly one of those opportunities to find those savings. The potential for cost savings is there when you're using recycled plastics, especially when you're talking about some of the plastics from packaging. Now, when you get into plastics from electronics and some of the more highly mixed materials and product types that require more dismantling, more technology, the price increases. And I'll show you here kind of a flow chart of all the technologies involved in recycling. And you'll see from that why sometimes using recycled content is not always the cheapest option, but it can be. And PET is one of them, and we'll talk about the cost savings you can see there. And some people are using recycled plastics as a market differentiator. One of the products we'll have on display at our recycled product showcase is a company called Green Toys, and they're using only 100% recycled HDPE, PET, and polystyrene. And they have, I think they said they're growing at a rate of like 50% annually in sales. They can't find enough recycled material to keep up with the demand for these products. And their selling point is they're made in America and they're made of recycled content. And so they've really boomed onto the marketplace and made a name for themselves by choosing recycled material. And then the reality is sometimes recycled content is becoming the new threshold for playing in a market. I think the best example is there's a standard called the EPEAT, the Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool. It's a mouthful. But basically it's a design standard for electronics that is meant to help guide institutional purchasers. So if you're at a university and you want to purchase green design technology, you go to the EPEAT registry and you find your products on there. Well, the federal government has made a mandate that said, and the federal government for the US is the #1 institutional purchaser in the US. They said, if you want to sell it to the federal government, you have to be on EPEAT. And so at that point, there's this voluntary standard, right, that has this component for recycled content. Well, it's no longer voluntary if you want access to the biggest customer in the US, right? Now it's become a threshold for entry into the market. And we're gonna see similar standards like that for appliances and in the automotive sector, I believe. So I think recycled content's going to be the new, if you want to play, you have to have it. So there's going to be more demand there as well, and that's certainly a big driver and incentive for people to adopt recycled plastics. So I wanted to give you guys an overview, if you're not familiar with how plastics recovery is happening, at least in the US right now. And I think we can probably infer either what's happening here, if there's some recovery happening from the systems there, and it might give you insight to where systems might need to grow and evolve to handle plastics on a massive scale when you start getting into the billions of pounds and the multiple different types of resins. So in the US, I believe the stat is like 75 or 80% of the population has access to recycling through their community, many of them through the curb. So that means when we put our garbage out, we also put out our bin for recycled materials. And at a minimum, 1s and 2s, so your PET and your HDPE are allowed. With the decline of paper at the curb, I don't know how the newspaper industry is doing here, but I wouldn't buy stock in newspapers in the US. They're seeing large declines. And that's left a big hole in what goes through to the material recovery facility. They need more material to fill that reduction in paper. So they're looking to plastics. And many of them now include those, what we call the non-bottle rigid plastics. So your yogurt tubs and the like. So it goes from the curb to the material recovery facility. So I'll show you a picture and give you a sense of what that is, but they're all over the map. Some of them, I went to one of the most basic material recovery facilities I've ever seen outside of the city of LA just a couple of weeks ago. Just a couple of moving belts, people picking material, nothing high-tech about it. It was still pretty effective, though. And then some of these MRFs are highly sophisticated, and we'll talk about those too. But this is the place where they say, here's my paper, here's my PET, here's my HDPE. Once they assemble a large enough volume, they make a bale here. That's a bale. So it goes into a big compactor, and they come out about 800 pounds of material. And then that becomes a tradable commodity in the industry. So then that gets sold to a plastics recycler down here. And we'll talk about, like I said, all of those systems and technologies that are being used in North America to high grade this material to go back into a product that is acceptable for remanufacturing and also in all sorts of end products. Okay, so collection options. So I talked about material coming in through the curb. So that's just really one option that people are using in the United States. There are certainly other options. One of those being drop-off centers. So if someone's not coming to you to get the material, we have many opportunities that you can take the material there. And so the residents will consolidate the material, take it to the location. Usually at that point, they're doing the source separation. So you're making a bin of PET or a bin of HDPE and a bin of paper and cardboard. And so you get very high quality material. You can often get more value when you sell it to a MRF. But the distance and the hassle of taking your materials somewhere can be a barrier to participation. So you don't get the same type of participation rates sometimes with drop-off centers. And then the idea of redemption centers. I don't know if folks here are familiar with like bottle bills, but this is where you would pay 5 to 10 cents on top of the price of your beverage. So say we're buying water for $1. You would pay $1.05 for your water, and then when you take your bottle back, you get your 5 cents back. And in those systems, Oregon started the first bottle bill system. It's the state I live in. We have an 85% recovery rate for beverage containers. So that's very successful recovery, and often really clean material too, because it's not getting mixed up with everything. Okay, so at the material recovery facility, can you guys see these pictures clearly? So this is the mix that comes in. Literally, they're just throwing it in the back of a garbage truck, dumping it on the floor, and then it's going on to these belts, and people are manually sorting them. Up here, you'll see there's, this will have a bunch of stars, discs, that will move the bigger material up, and the smaller material will fall down onto a belt. And then, again, the end product is supposed to be this really nice, clean bale. And just to give you a sense of the cost of a modern MRF, Sims built probably the biggest, most sophisticated MRF we've ever seen. They just opened it this year. They built it to service all of New York City. Cost $94 million. And it was a shared expense between Sims and the city of New York. So not suggesting that your community wanted a MRF. It would have to be to the tune of $94 million. But there is, the idea is, you know, just to suggest there is some technology investment to be made in these if you want high quality materials and you are dealing with a highly mixed pile of material. Okay, and not all MRFs, like I just said, are created equal. And so really depending on the technology that you put into a MRF will really dictate what you can collect. For example, that film that we talked about, those plastic bags, MRFs don't want them. They get caught up in those stars. MRFs actually have scheduled downtime to recover that plastics off. But some MRFs have equipment that can deal with it. So it really, how you construct your MRF, you need to think about what type of collection you want to offer long term. Okay, so let's look at what all goes into the recycling process. So you have your bale here, shows up at the door of the recycler. You have to break that bale apart, right? See what's in there, separate the material a little more. It's going to go through a near infrared sorter. Every plastic will give off a unique signature on using near infrared. And the machine will say, oh, you're PET, you're HDPE, you're polypropylene, and will shoot it off into its own clean stream with some margin of error. But you get a pretty clean sort from a whole bottle sort. Then I would say all post-consumer packaging is going to have to go through a wash of some sort, and then it gets size reduced. You really want metal out. Metal doesn't work well in any plastics manufacturing equipment, so you got a metal detector. Then you have a grinder that's going to grind it down into like 1/2 inch minus pieces, really tiny flakes. Maybe even send it through another wash line. Then we'll do some density separation. So plastics also have different densities. So you can float it in water, PET will sink, HDPE and polypropylene will float. So they further separate it and clean it that way. And then sometimes they even send it through another flake sorter. And at that point, you can also do color sortation and really get kind of about you can get like 99.9% purity if you go through this whole process. Again, just to give you an idea of how much technology and equipment goes in, PetStar just opened up in Mexico. They're now the world's largest PET recycling plant, owned in part by Coca-Cola. And from what I could read in the literature that was available, they've spent at least $50 million on this plant over the course of 5 years or so. Oops. Okay, so mechanical recycling pros, you can get 99% purity. We talked about all the environmental benefits of it. There are some downsides. There can be some residual impurities that can cause your product to have less than virgin-like performances and some product failure. Each time you melt a polymer, it gets a little bit of degradation. And then the color of a product can limit what it goes into. You're not going to make that white chair with this. There's no way. That's going to be a black gardening pot or something like that. And then sometimes, like in the case of electronics, you could have flame retardants in them, which don't pose an environmental risk or problem, but it does narrow the end-use application that it can potentially go into. Okay, so in addition to mechanical recycling, there's chemical recycling. The company I worked with, Sabic, they had a chemical recycling process. You could unzip the polymer, so PET in particular, and take out the polymer then is no longer a polymer, it's a monomer, and you can rebuild it into a new polymer, and they were making PBT. So this process, it certainly has a much higher environmental footprint than mechanical recycling, still lower than virgin production, but you can overcome a lot of those limitations that come along with mechanical recycling. Sometimes you can even strip out the color in there. But the price it's often more expensive than production of virgin resin. So it hasn't picked up too far. Pyrolysis is a technology that we're looking very closely at. So these are technologies that can take all of those plastics that can't be mechanically recycled, either because it's technically not feasible or it's economically not feasible. And you can turn it back into a variety of fuel products, again, sometimes capture monomers out of this process. And then there's a technology that's probably the leading technology in the US. This is very close to where I live in Portland, Oregon. They're taking it back to crude-like product, and they're selling it to a refinery for the same price as you would from a barrel of oil extracted from the earth. And so if you can couple a system like this with a mechanical recycling system, you create a solid waste management infrastructure where no plastics go to waste. Very little have to go to the landfill, and you are treating plastics like how they should be treated, again, because they are a valuable resource that needs to be given a second life. Okay, so let's take a close look here at PET, since I think this is a place that makes a lot of sense to start any type of plastics recycling program. Because once you have a program in place, you can bolt on new materials and expand it. So PET collection in the US, so again, we've got the curbside collection, and then you'll see here, this is what we call a reverse vending machine. I don't know if they have come to the Dominican Republic yet, but that's where you would put your bottle back in and get your dime or your nickel. And then you would need a baler here because, again, they are lightweight, and you don't want to be paying to ship air, right? So you need to smash them and get as much density as you can out of them. And so vertical balers are great for smaller spaces. Horizontal balers are the ones you can get higher density and bigger bales, and those are the ones you'll see at the big megamurphs. But these are great for film, bottles, anything at a small collection point. And then once you've accumulated 40,000 pounds in these shipping containers, they get shipped. And I mentioned that scrap is a big export for the US. And container shipping has really revolutionized recycling. And I'll show you here in a later slide all of the different PET recycling options in North America. And so if you guys can get the material into a container, and I imagine your situation might be similar to what we experience on the West Coast. We have a lot of full shipping containers coming from China filled with finished product. They get to the shores of California, get unloaded. We don't have anything to put back into them because we're not doing a lot of manufacturing in the United States. So the empty shipping containers, you can get a real cheap rate to go back to China. And the situation might be the same here. So let's look at the economics. So we said it's good for the environment, it's good for business, right? Well, let's look at what the business opportunity might be. I put together some pricing for PET over the past few years. Some of the pricing goes back even farther. But you'll see here, the price certainly fluctuates some. We've had, there are different forces driving pricing. But you can see for bottles, on average, you could get maybe 15 cents a pound. Those are for baled bottles, which isn't too bad. You can certainly build a business case around collection. From the West Coast, so that was from the East Coast. Pricing from the East Coast and the West Coast can be a little bit different. So bottles from Long Beach, again, because we have California or China demanding products, they're getting almost up to 25 cents a pound, a little past 25 cents a pound. So as with any plastic, as you begin to do more to it, it's called value add. So you're increasing value. You're getting it further close to that remanufacturing, that state that's acceptable for remanufacturing. So let's look at flake pricing. So how do you make flake? You shred the bottle. That's it. Whoops. And there might be some washing here too. So if you do some value add to it, you can increase 40 cents a pound. So there's definitely the economic case that can be made to begin to do a little more to the bottles. And if you're shipping flake, you're getting even better density than a bale. So that's good news for transportation pricing. If you want to go back to a pellet, okay, and so at that 65 cents, about 65, 70 cents a pound there, you can often, if you're not making new bottles, you can use flake straight back into manufacturing. You don't have to go to the pelletizing process, which you'll see adds about another 15 cents a pound to the price. So if you were taking the bottle and making pellets for potential remanufacturing into bottles, you are going to be making a lot more money than if you're just selling bottles. But you could just stop at flake. So the point of sharing this pricing is to demonstrate that you can certainly make money from the PET recycling process. And so I wanted to also provide a list of the consumers of PET bottles in North America. And Mexico, I reached out to Anipac, which is our counterpart in Mexico, and he said he's got a list of many other smaller recyclers in Mexico, so don't think that PetStar is the only one there. But you can see there's big demand for this material, and demand certainly outpaces the supply. So what are some of these bottles going into? Fiber is a big one. Your pillow, unless you're sleeping on a down pillow, it's likely filled with PET bottles. Fleece, all right, fleece probably not a big fashion item here. It's so warm, but fleece in the Northwest, there's a lot of fleece, and it's recycled PET. Sheet and film, strapping, you'll see conversion back into bottles takes about a quarter. So there is closed loop recycling of PET. So just a quick overview here. So the US PET recycling industry, they operate at a 72% capacity, which means they have excess capacity. And so more volume can easily be diverted into the system without requiring any capital investment on their part. So the point is, the demand is there. If the supply can be generated, it's gonna be sucked up by the existing infrastructure. Clean bales are really in demand. The current bale, this is another sad number, if you buy a bale of PET in the US and you're the recycler, you're only gonna get 60% PET out of that bale, 40% contamination. If you can make clean bales, you can compete at a really high level in the market. Here's another stat that I think really paints the demand picture in the US. So 469 million pounds of baled bottles were exported largely to China from the US last year. And because so much material left, it's about 50% of what's collected. US recyclers had to re-import 149 million pounds, largely from Mexico and Canada. So if the Dominican Republic could contribute at all to that volume, again, there's a big market to send material north. And then according to the Institute, and I think this is a really important economic piece that is often overlooked in recycling. This is a little bit dated, this figure, but this is the one that even the US EPA references. According to the Institute of Local Self-Reliance, systematic recovery of every 10,000 tons of solid waste, it creates only 6 jobs in the infrastructure if you're just dumping it into a landfill. If you put the same amount of material to use in a recycling infrastructure, you can create 36 jobs through that entire recycle supply chain. So there's a big economic benefit to a community and a state and a country for supporting the growth of recycling, not just of plastics, of all commodities. And so, I mean, just to recap for you, I think there is a big opportunity walking around today and just the interactions at the airport and around, there's a lot of PET being consumed. And so there is a big opportunity to begin to manage this, not as a waste product, again, because we need to shift our thinking about plastics, right? This is a valuable resource that we need to be managing in a much different way. So there is adequate volume, I think, to justify collection in the Dominican Republic, perhaps even using the Dominican Republic as a central consolidation point. And there's ample demand for this material. If you collected it, don't worry, someone's gonna buy it. And you know, and even outside of North America, that global demand far exceeds supply. The reason our members began to support recycling efforts is because they said we cannot get the material in the amount we want or the form or the quality that we want, and we need to communicate our needs back through the recycle value chain. And then you know, plastics are a valuable commodity, so there really is a business opportunity. Again, let's go back to some of those pillars of sustainability, right? It's got to be good for the community, it's got to be good for the planet, and it's got to be good for the business community for it to be sustainable. And this is one of those efforts that I do believe kind of fits all three of those categories. And then obviously, as we highlighted, there's the environmental piece. Plastics last a long time. And if we don't manage them properly, we're gonna eventually be managing them. And it's better to manage them as a resource than a problem in the future. I wanted to throw on one website here, recycleplastics365.org. It's a website that we started. It's a free place to go look for plastic material if you're wanting it to remanufacture it. If you have material, it's a free place to go and list it. It's a tool that we wanted to put out there to bridge that supply and demand piece for the industry. So if you're ever looking for material, please feel free to go visit that website. We just included Canada on this website, and we're working hard to include ANIPAC as well, the Mexican Plastics Trade Association. So it truly will have a full North American presence. And so with that kind of concludes the information I prepared for you tonight. So I understand we have some time for questions, and so I welcome those. But I did want to include, this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out anytime. If you have questions, if we aren't working directly in that area, we work with many, many other trade associations working on plastics recycling issues, and I would be happy to get you connected with them if we can't help you directly. So thank you.